Hey, good day, everybody, and welcome to your Ruby Live event. My name is Eric Wynkoop, and I'm the Director of Culinary Instruction here at the Ruby Online Culinary School. And I'm also one of your chef instructors in the courses, along with the other members of our team here. Today's live event is my office hours. I want to thank you all for joining me personally. I'm here to answer your questions that are related to food and cooking. And, as always, let me start with a couple of brief housekeeping items. And the first one is, as you can see already on the right-hand side of your screen, there are a number of questions that have been populated. And if you are interested in joining in with a question or a comment, feel free to enter your question or comment in the small dialog box in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And that'll eventually make its way to the queue that you see on the right-hand side of the page. And then the second item that I'll mention is, as you look at the questions, you'll see a heart-shaped icon. And if you would like that question answered sooner than later, go ahead and click on that, and it'll send it up in priority toward the top of the list. Okay? And, without further ado, let me go ahead and jump on in and start answering your questions. Thank you. And so we'll start with the question from Mary. In the Whole Food Plant-Based Certification course, smoothies are welcome, but in FOK, they don't want you to drink your calories, i.e. no smoothies. Is there a physical reason for this, or is it just the style of each branch? I will begin by sharing the first thing that comes to my mind, and that is that the Forks Over Knives course, while fundamentally similar, right, in content, or I should say in nature with the Pro Plant course, although the depth and the length of the course is much different. The Forks Over Knives course, I would say, has a stronger health and medical underpinning to it. And so those are, in other words, a little bit more front and center as the conversation goes through the course. One can certainly approach the plant-based course in the same way, but that's where I would start off my explanation here. Now, in terms of smoothies, I think the important thing to keep in mind, and this is really true of all of the food in these courses, whether we're talking about sweeteners or salt or sugar or something that might be processed to some degree. Okay, our goal is to emphasize whole foods and plant foods. Okay, now on a spectrum of food processing, a smoothie, right, is clearly processed and not entirely in its or exactly in its whole original form. But if we were to pull that spectrum out even further, we see juicing farther down the lane. And so if we just generally do some comparison here, okay, juicing, while some people do it, that's fine. That's an individual choice, as well as smoothies being an individual choice. You're getting the fiber, right, in smoothies compared to juicing. So that's, maybe arguably better for most people most of the time. Now, further up the spectrum, if we're heading toward whole foods again, we're doing more chewing and there's more interactivity, right, with the whole foods. And so, again, arguably, perhaps the whole food choice could be better for a lot of people a lot of the times. As far as smoothies go, one of the concerns is that they are, first of all, easy to consume, and they are often consumed in addition to a meal, all right? When they often have the calories and the value of a meal in itself. And so I think that's where some of the concern lies, right? So we end up increasing our energetic intake, which is not necessary, again, for most people, most of the time. So, take the smoothie message within this larger context. If you're an FOK student, and you want to make a smoothie because that's your routine, have at it, right? It's an individual choice at the end of the day. But do understand what the bigger message is, okay, to maintain balance and moderation, okay, in the way we eat. And if you choose to have a smoothie for a meal today, right, while you're otherwise enjoying whole foods throughout the day or the week, I don't see a problem with it. But again, I'll leave that up to you. Okay, thank you. And next question. How often do you use a non-stick pan in the kitchen over stainless steel, and what brand would you recommend if I need to replace my old green pan? My personal use of non-stick pans varies. And, I will say that this week, the couple of times that I've used it were when I was reheating sweet potatoes that I had previously roasted or baked in the oven. And so they had a lot of syrup coming out of them. They're very sticky. And the nonstick pan was a quick and easy way to reheat those. And, otherwise, stainless steel is probably my most frequent go-to, if not cast iron or enameled iron or a clay pot or a stone pot. In terms of a recommendation for a nonstick pan, this is my longer answer here. A nonstick pan for me is a disposable item. I don't spend a whole lot of money on them because over time they develop scratches, and over time they lose their nonstick quality. So, first of all, I don't recommend buying a full set of nonstick pans because at some point they become less and less effective. And so I will go out and buy a single pan or maybe a couple of them at a restaurant supply store. And you can find those sometimes in your city or sometimes online. The brand that I have in-house right now are Vollrath, Vollrath. And Vollrath is a manufacturer of restaurant equipment, very commonly used across the United States. And so that's the brand that I have right now. Thank you. And next from Don. What does miso paste do in recipes? Many of the recipes in FOK call for 1 or 2 teaspoons of miso paste, but I was shocked how expensive it is for a 16-ounce container. What does it do for the dish? Miso paste is a flavorful ingredient. It provides primarily umami. It's a staple in the Japanese kitchen. Japanese cooking really emphasizes this idea of depth of flavor and the development of umami. And miso paste is a great ingredient to help you develop that aspect of the flavor enjoyment of your food. Depending on the type of miso, and there are many, many types on the market, it will also provide saltiness and sweetness, right? Or very often a combination of the two. And so that's what you get done. Lots of umami, usually salt, but it could also be sweetness depending on the type. Thank you. And next up from Laura. Hello. Is there a rule of thumb I can follow to choose and use the right plant-based milk for both sweet and salty preparations? That is for baking and for cooking sauces such as a bechamel. No hard rule of thumb comes to mind. A couple of thoughts otherwise are, number one, read the label, the ingredient label, to see just what you're getting if you're buying a store-bought product, to see how much sugar is added, how much other flavorings like vanilla might be contained in that product, and then think about how you intend to use it, okay? And the other item would be just to be aware of the many choices, right, on the market. There are probably certainly a half a dozen or so different non-dairy milk products that you can probably buy at most any mainstream grocery store. Now, if you were to make your own, then you have so many choices. In fact, we've got an archived live event where I talk about plant-based milks, and you have legume-based, grain-based, and many other options out there. So start with that basic information in mind. Do some tasting and pick your favorites. Otherwise, get to know how these things come through in a finished dish as well. Thank you. And next up from Marina, which method of making cheese is better and why? Using agar as a setting agent or culturing with a probiotic? I think the better question, right, is going to be a personal and individual decision based upon convenience, based upon perhaps flavor development, and then also based upon the cachet, perhaps, of making your own cheese in the spirit of, I'll say a traditional, conventional milk-based cheese. Okay, so in other words, as far as convenience goes, an agar set cheese can be made pretty quickly, probably within, say, 90 or so minutes, whereas a cultured cheese may take you a week, right? Give or take some. All right, so there's going to be a convenience factor there. Flavor development, these differ a little bit, but each can be very satisfying or very poorly made. And so it really just depends on the skill of the hands that are doing the work. And then in terms of the cachet, it depends on, again, who your audience is and what kind of a message you might want to convey. But the idea of putting in lots of labor and lots of study and many days of fermentation time in the spirit of a dairy-based cheese may win you more points in social circles than simply setting a few ingredients with agar. But I've made them both ways. I've had good examples. I've had poor examples. So the best cheese really is going to be ultimately up to you and your situation. Thank you. And thank you, Patrick. Patrick has just listed a link to the archived live event on plant-based milks. Thank you. Next from Kristen. Can you provide a few tips on proper body position when developing knife skills? Hey, this is a great question, and one that I get with some frequency from our students, usually through our Q&A or Zendesk, student support paths. And yes, let me share a couple, 3 thoughts that come to mind. And one is to be relaxed. And I will also say that relaxation will come with time. Very often when we are starting something new, our focus is intense, and often that leads to tense muscles. But the goal ultimately is to relax through the hands, through the wrist, through the arms, through the shoulders, through the neck, through the back, through the hips, through the legs, all the way down to your feet. And then the other thing to do is just find a body position relative to the countertop and the cutting board that makes sense. So, for example, I will typically set an item parallel to the edge of the counter or the cutting board for me to cut. And in order for me to cut that comfortably, it requires me to shift my body a little bit. And it could be 30 degrees or 45 degrees, somewhere right in there, so that my knife moves straight across the cutting board rather than at an angle. Okay, but that's a personal decision, but give that a try. Okay, maintain some flexibility in the knees. Okay, and also, have a comfortable floor to stand on. Maybe it's a cushy mat or a rug or something like that. So I think start with that positioning and be aware of the tension that enters your body, and then try to get rid of that tension, in particular through the shoulders and neck and upper back when we start our knife skill development. All right, thank you. All right, next question. I see many recipes with maple syrup or fruit paste as a sweetening agent. I was wondering what your thoughts are on stevia. Aha. Diane, I am a big fan of stevia. However, my requirement is that it's whole leaf stevia. And I've got a stash at home. I bring this back from India whenever I'm over there. I don't see it otherwise in the market. When it comes to the granulated, highly refined stevia, I steer clear of that personally in favor of something like a fruit puree or maple syrup. But otherwise, whole leaf stevia, I'm all about it. Thank you. All right. And next up, what is the best and fastest way to peel garlic? I spend a lot of time peeling individual garlic cloves. Well, certainly one consideration is to purchase peeled garlic cloves. That is a super convenient product if you use a lot of garlic. Otherwise, there is a tool. It's a silicone tube about that big around, maybe 6 or so inches long, and you put a few cloves in there and you roll it back and forth on your cutting board, and it removes the peels pretty quickly. Okay. And then, otherwise, what I find myself doing every once in a while is if I'm get a chance to sit down, in front of the window or on the sofa, I'll have a couple of bowls in my lap, one with garlic, and then the other one where I put the skins, and I guess a third bowl, right, for the peeled garlic cloves. And so that becomes, a bit of a family activity in a way. All right. Thank you. All right, next up, hello, Subhashini. Can you do the no oil saute method in any pan, or does it have to be stainless steel? You can do it in any pan. I think the difference, however, is when it comes to our video lesson that features the mercury ball test, that works most effectively on stainless steel due to the hardness and the tightness of that material. When you shift over to, other materials, let's say cast iron, you'll want to season that pan in order to start to build up some nonstick quality. That, for example, cast iron pans are known for anyway. All right. And then, you can start to do the no oil work in a pan like that. Otherwise, it can be challenging in a clay pot, for example, which I use once in a while when I'm doing some South Indian preparations. Of course, if it's wet, a lot of those preparations are wet, and that's not a problem because the food eventually lifts off the pan. But if you're trying to do some dry work, things get sticky on stone and clay pots. But give it a try, and you just need to modulate the heat and find the sweet spot for that particular material. Okay, but definitely you can do it on many different types of materials. Thank you. All right, next up from Barbara. Would you please describe the different types of potatoes and which ones are best for specific preparations? For instance, mashed, sauteed, baked, scallopini, and roasted. Aha. So your question, the answer to your question would be a book, and I think they're out there. But let me just briefly say that we think about potatoes in two broad categories, and one is the waxy potato that tends to have a relatively higher sugar content, and it cooks up more firm than the other category of potato, which is where russet potatoes fall into, for example, which are a little or mealy, they're a little bit more starchy, and those tend to cook up a little more dry and fluffy, and have less structure. Okay, when they're cooked. So therefore, if we're looking at your list, mashed potatoes do really well with the mealy, the russet type of potato. Again, not that you can't cross over with preparations, you certainly can. But in terms of a light, fluffy mashed potato, it's going to be the mealy type. Sauteed, it's kind of a general term here, but if you want the item to hold its shape, then reach for a waxy type. And then baked potato, we usually like our baked potatoes to be light and fluffy, so I would reach for a mealy type. For again, a russet would be a good example. Scallopini, roasted, again, in scallopini, we want it to hold its shape. So a waxy potato works very well. And then roasted, anything does well with roasting. Sweet potatoes, waxies, mealies, you name it. But again, give these a try, mix and match with the cooking methods, and see what you like. That's going to be very important at the end of the day. All right, thank you. All right, look at this. Another question from Subhashini. When making vegetable broth or stock, does it make a difference in flavor development if you add all the water up front versus only adding enough water to just barely cover the veggies at first and then adding more water as needed? Okay. Not necessarily. The idea of adding water little by little or topping it off as needed is an effort to not dilute the finished products. In other words, if you end up putting lots of water in the pot and you had, let's say, 3 hours to simmer and it only reduced a little bit, you could be stuck with a somewhat diluted end product. So in order to avoid that scenario and have more control, we tend to add a little bit of water as needed. And again, that's based upon the size of the pot and how much surface area and evaporation will take place, as well as the intensity of the heat, and again, how quickly the evaporation or reduction will take place. But there's not necessarily a difference, okay, to answer your question. All right, thank you. And Pam is asking, what is the correct way to pronounce Herbs? I'm familiar with two pronunciations, herbs with a silent H, as well as herbs, where the H is aspirated. Depending on where you come from, either one of those could be considered correct. Thank you. And we have the next question. What should great roasted Brussels sprouts, color, texture, taste be? What's your preference? I've been trying to make them crunchy on the outside, but still haven't been successful. Any tips? Does the type of sheet pan make any difference? Yes. So there are some subtleties here. And let's see, in terms of what I like, I'm going to start with that one. I just like Brussels sprouts that are cooked all the way through, not necessarily, super duper soft. I like to chew my food and enjoy that interactivity. But I do like a smoothie once in a while. But it's got, the Brussels sprouts should be cooked all the way through. I think that's considered proper doneness at any rate. Now, in terms of crunchiness on the outside, I'll say one thing to begin with, and that is that oil helps. Okay, oil helps create a crispy outside on most any food. If you're working with a no oil technique or method, then it becomes a little bit more challenging to do that. High heat also helps. Something above 400 degrees might get you to that crispiness that you're looking for. We are, after all, looking for a little bit of a drying effect. Okay, that's the crispiness. And in terms of what's the proper benchmark of a good Brussels sprout? Generally speaking, I would say develop some color, develop some browning, some caramelization, because that equals flavor development in addition to visual appeal. But I think the flavor part of that is a big one. We talked about umami development a few minutes ago, browning your food is one way to do that as well. And so I think that's desirable when it comes to Brussels sprouts. And I touched upon texture, other details of the taste kind of come along with that cooking. The browning, for example. As far as a sheet pan goes, I will say that a silicone baking mat gets very hot. And very often you can enjoy some deeper browning on any foods if it sits on top of a silicone baking mat. However, be aware of the manufacturer's maximum temperature recommendation, okay, so that you don't overheat the silicone baking mat. I will say from experience that they will discolor, and perhaps other things happen. I don't know, but follow the manufacturer's guidelines, please. Thank you. All right, another question from Laura. Are stainless steel pans good for frying? While I've been using stainless steel pots for many types of preparations for many years, I'm not familiar with pans of the same material, and I've always used nonstick pans to fry. And let's see here. Stainless steel certainly is good for frying. Stainless steel is, it's an all-purpose material, but then, so are all these other materials, right? I mentioned stone and clay and cast iron and just all kinds of other variations on alloys. And they're all really suitable for all of the cooking methods that we cover in our courses. It's really a matter of you, the cook, getting used to using a given type of vessel, right, in terms of its material. But the quick answer is, stainless steel works well. All right, thank you. And let's see, from Priya, I'm new to oil-free cooking. Are we to reduce the temperature during the cooking process? My pan burned. Okay. So certainly if you're experiencing burning of any sort, try to work at a lower temperature. Okay. In terms of oil-free cooking, perhaps I think what we also have in mind here is the mercury ball test, right? That's often the lesson that accompanies the no oil saute method. And the mercury ball test calls for the pan to be heated really high. And so in many of these instances, I would recommend that you do allow the pan to cool a smidge either before or immediately after putting the food product in the pan so that you can control the burning. Okay. But certainly that's going to be the first cue. Okay. Is any burning in the pan? That should require a cooler temperature. All right. Thank you. And the next question, can figs be used in place of dates or date paste as sweetener in recipes? Sure, if you want to use that. That's totally up to you, okay? When figs are at their peak of ripeness, their sweetness is really beautiful, very intense. There are other times when they're not quite as sweet as we routinely experience with dates. But that call is up to you, okay? Thank you. And the next question, I recently did a Rouxbe recipe in roasted eggplants with olive oil, salt, pepper. Some of them turn out beautiful, but some of them turn out to be bitter and inedible. What could have caused this? Well, I guess the first thing that comes to mind is there's going to be some bitter components, right, in the eggplant, and that's not uncommon with nightshade vegetables or items, I guess, fruits or I guess botanically, whatever they're categorized as. And for eggplant, you might consider salting them and just see if that preparation technique might either draw in some salt or draw out some bitterness to help balance that effect. Okay, and that's certainly what's recommended in some preparations, some recipes, and see how that might influence your outcomes as well. Thank you. All right, and next up from Julia, I have celiac, and I know there's a gluten-free unit, but will there be modifications for the other recipes? Julia, the quick answer is yes. When it comes to changes that we need to make for recipes for any number of reasons, that is indeed possible. Okay, depending on what course you're in. Okay, we do have an assignment in the Pro Cook course that uses vital gluten flour. It's the seitan preparation, and for that one, I'd have to ponder that some more. Okay, but there might be an option for that as well. Okay, but again, the basic approach is that there is a substitute for ingredients. Okay, please keep in mind that substitutes can be challenging as well, depending on the function of the ingredient. Okay, and so sometimes when we remove a single ingredient, we might have to find multiple ingredients, 2, 3, 4, 5 ingredients sometimes to perform the functions of the ingredient that was taken out. And so if you have a specific question, reach out to us and we can do our best at troubleshooting. And then the next steps might require you to do some experimentation to find that finished product that really suits what it is that you're looking for. Okay, thank you. And next up, do you recommend any brand of knives? What about the difference between using plastic versus wood cutting boards? Okay, a couple of big questions here. The knife discussion is a big one because it really depends on the individual. Okay, knives are almost like underwear, right? In terms of being a very personal sort of an item, and it should be comfortable. In this case, in your hand. And there's also budgetary concerns, and there might be some other considerations as well. But I will begin by saying that there are many options for good knives on the market. One that I will mention is the Victorinox brand. And these are this is the Swiss Army knife company. And some years ago, the Consumer Reports magazine rated the Victorinox brand chef's knife as their top pick, their recommendation. And I've got a couple of them. They are inexpensive. There's nothing sophisticated about them. They're stamped steel. They've got a molded rubber handle, but they provide a very good value, at least in my opinion. They hold an edge reasonably well. They're pretty easy to sharpen and otherwise maintain. They provide zero cool factor, however. Okay, so if that's important, then you might consider a different brand. All right. When it comes to a cutting board, my very simple recommendation is to avoid very hard surfaces. For example, I sometimes see glass cutting boards or stainless steel cutting boards. And, I steer clear of those. But otherwise, wood or plastic works fine with me. I use both of them. All right. Thank you. And next question. What kind of spatulas do you use with stainless steel pots and pans? Steel, wood, silicone, plastic, or something else? Let's see here. What do I have in the kitchen? Let me just think about this for a moment. I've got utensils made of steel, wood, silicone, bamboo as well. And, any of those work. Stainless steel, leaves some scratches. They bang around a bit. But certainly wood, bamboo, and silicone are pretty easy in terms of contact on the surface. All right. Thank you. And next up from Jane, any advice on how to temper a cast iron pan after it's been burnt? The important thing is to clean the pan first, so you can get a nice seasoning layer sort of regenerated. And how you clean that, I said, you could sand blast it or bead blast it if it's really stubborn. Otherwise, a lot of elbow grease may be necessary with a good scouring pad, and then you can restart the process, with oil and then heating in the oven at high temperature. And you do that multiple times to build up a layer. Okay, thank you. Okay, next question. I've tried several cream sauces, cashew sour cream, dill dip sauce, Gabriel's cheese sauce, and don't care for any of them. Any thoughts as to why? Suggestions, or do I need to focus on vinaigrettes instead? And I don't know. I guess if I could have a conversation with you, we might talk about texture. We might talk about your sensitivity towards certain flavors or tastes, and then it might be able to narrow something down. But I guess the bottom line is, if you don't like them, then move on to a category of sauce or dressing that is appealing to you. And it sounds like vinaigrettes are appealing, in which case you will find many, many different styles, from your traditional sort of oil and vinegar style to emulsified, creamy styles of vinaigrette. And of course, the possibility of flavor combinations is probably endless. All right, so give that a try. Thank you. And gosh, look at that. Another question from Subhashini. How do you use the whole leaf stevia you mentioned? And not that I'll ever have the chance to use this, just curious. I will, it comes dried. And so I will crush it up into some sort of a liquid medium in order to draw out that sweetness. And then, that's used to sweeten whatever it is I'm making, cookies or something else. But sometimes it's, tea, a beverage. I just crush it in my fingertips and let it infuse right into a liquid. Thank you. And looks like Louise had the same sort of question. All right. You can also, put it into a spice grinder and really break it down into a powder if you want it to be not so noticeable. Okay, but definitely in its whole leaf form, if you moisturize it, the leaf can be a little bit tough. I mean, it is a fibrous leaf after all. Okay. Let's see. And Elaine is asking, what are cocoa nibs and how would you use or prepare them? So cocoa nibs are cocoa beans that have been broken up into smaller pieces. And cocoa nibs are enjoyed for their texture. They provide some of that earthy cocoa flavor from beans that you get from beans. And of course, any of these foods that we're talking about provide some sort of a nutrition, right? And plants we associate with these phytonutrients, and again, we enjoy that with all of our foods that we eat, and certainly cocoa nibs have been marketed as that sort of a health food. If you make cookies or quick breads, you can just add a fistful of nibs. For some texture, that's really what you're going to notice. If you choose to snack on them, I guess you could do that, and you'll pick up more of that earthy cocoa quality. All right, thank you. And the next question from Barbara. What would make a pasta pot better as far as how quickly they reach a boil and then hold the temperature? I have an induction hob, and I have a difficulty reaching and maintaining a full boil with my rather inexpensive stainless steel pots. Okay. Well, I mean, generally speaking, in terms of cookware construction, I recommend finding a pot that is relatively heavy in its construction. First of all, at the base, so that heat is evenly distributed, and the I'd say, minimum standard these days is probably a 3-ply construction. You see some that have maybe 5 or 6 plies, layers of metals that are sandwiched together. It could be aluminum or steel and copper in alternating layers in order to disperse the heat more evenly. I guess to some extent it could even, I don't know about holding on to heat, because those metals I mentioned can also dissipate heat pretty quickly. But otherwise, for pasta, a lot of times they are taller in order so that you've got a volume of water with a smaller surface area, right? So heat escapes more slowly. So it's a little bit taller. So that's a consideration as well. You might give that a try. Thank you. And next up from Michael, can you provide a step-by-step overview in PDF of how to spin this class into a YouTube or other social media channel? And let's see here. There we go. Is any ongoing support offered through Forks Over Knives to support such ventures? If not, can something be created? Well, gosh, my first response here is that this particular question falls outside of the bounds of the focus, right, on food and cooking. This is also in an area that's probably above my pay grade. But I will say or suggest that you might reach out to somebody online that's doing what you like, what you want to see, and ask them for some guidance on how you might achieve your goals here. Thank you. Okay, next up from Louise again. I'm big on puddings right now, so winter comfort food, and the recipes I have use cornstarch. Is it possible to do one-for-one substitute from cornstarch to chia seeds? I'm thinking I would grind the seeds first. I'm not sure what the conversion ratio is. My sense is that cornstarch is probably a stronger thickening agent than chia, but a quick online search, I think, would get you an answer. Okay, thank you. And, okay, back to roasting in Brussels sprouts, please. Okay, says Anne, for a fully crunchy vegetable like Brussels sprouts and many root vegetables, does it make sense to lightly steam them first? If you want to certainly shorten the cooking time, that's the first thing that comes to mind for me. You can par cook an item. And, in terms of a crunchy exterior, again, if it's the exterior that we're after, we still need to dry the exterior. So we still have those same concerns, right, where we need a high enough temperature and enough time to draw away the water from the surface. Also keeping in mind that if you choose to use oil or some fat, that will facilitate the crispy development on the surface. Okay, but as far as par cooking goes, give it a try and see what sort of results you come up with. All right, thank you. Okay, next question, task 66, roasting veg practice in FOK ultimate course. Does not state an oven temperature for baking the vegetables. Are we supposed to look up based on vegetable we choose to use? Well, my first thought that comes to mind is that it can depend upon the size, of course, of the cut or the vegetable, as well as the vegetable itself. Typically when we work with smaller cuts, so for example, a large dice, right, or a medium dice, we want a higher temperature. And so something above 400 degrees, I think about 425 or 450 as a starting point, in order to develop the color on the surface quickly as the heat quickly penetrates to the center of that small piece. If it's a larger item like a whole potato, then we drop that heat to something around 350 degrees, and then we extend the cooking time. Okay. Now there's variability with these products, and I think part of the learning curve, right, with cooking, generally speaking, is for you to sort of, I'll say, play around or experiment and sort of engage with that process, so that the staple items in your house, right, you're going to get to know within a pretty short period of time. But just keep in mind that basic guideline that I shared, okay, regarding the size of the item relative to the cooler or the hotter cooking temperature, and then make adjustments from there. Okay, you can push the temperature up to 475 if you want, or drop it down to 400 for smaller items. And then, for larger items, make those adjustments also. All right. Yeah, I mean, I don't think you need to look up specific cooking temperatures for these items. You can again just kind of experiment a little bit, and you'll find these ranges, high and low, that work for you most of the time. Okay. Thank you. And next up, another question from Raj. How do we easily make miso soup at home? What do we add to the soup stock? Miso soup is typically, based upon dashi, and dashi is really the word for stock in Japanese. And there are different types of dashi. If you were to grab any mainstream Japanese recipe book, it would guide you through the process of making dashi based upon shaved bonito, right, which is a type of fish, in combination with kelp, okay, a type of sea vegetable or seagrass, and that gives you a nice umami-rich dashi. And then to that dashi, we would add miso paste. You can certainly add other internal ingredients based upon your preference, okay, whether that's tofu or onions or something else. All right. Now, if you're steering clear of any fish or animal products, then you can make dashi from kelp only, and that's quite tasty. It's different. Okay, it lacks a little bit of that depth, a little bit of that umami that you get from the katsuobushi, from the shaved bonito. The bonito is dried over an open fire, so it gets a smoky quality as well. So that type of dashi tends to be very rich in aroma and flavor. Okay, but a lot of the glutamates come from seagrasses, right? The kelp, for example. So you're going to get a pretty good amount of the umami qualities coming through. Okay, that's it. Then add your miso paste, other internal ingredients, and you've got miso soup. All right, thank you. And next up, do you have recommendations on the stainless steel cookware brand in terms of quality that won't break a budget? One item that comes to mind that I have seen recently at Costco is their Kirkland brand stainless steel cookware set. And that one appears to be a good value. All right, thank you. And let's see, Andrea is asking, any tips for working with kelp noodles? Kelp noodles, you want to hydrate them based upon the instructions, right, on the package. Kelp noodles stay sort of crunchy. They stay very firm. And so they're, in my opinion anyway, they're nice in salads where we often welcome that sort of a crunchy texture. Okay. I've tried them with, hot spaghetti sauce as well in place of pasta. It's not real satisfying to me anyway, but, try out some different things and see what might appeal to you. Thank you. And next up, what is the best way to use leftover baked potatoes in a commercial restaurant setting? Aha, well, let's see here. To make a soup, like a chowder style soup, comes to mind. That's something that I've done in the past. And, once you get all those other ingredients in the pot with the potatoes become a very secondary sort of ingredient. And it's a great way, I think, to utilize that product. Yeah, I think that's it. Some sort of a soup or stew variation. Potatoes thicken soups and stews very nicely. So you can think of it from its functionality standpoint as well. All right. Thank you. All right, and next one from Karen. So I took the FOK course. Shopping list template was formatted so that I could print out double-sided. The plant-based pro course shopping list is formatted to print over 3 pages. Could it be reformatted to print on 1? Yeah, you bet. Well, let's take a look at that, okay? And see what our engineers can do. Thank you. Next up from Palonka, how is the easiest way when practicing the different types of knife cuts to measure each cut of vegetable? Aha. So a couple of things come to mind. And one is on the market are knife cut models. And these are small little tools that are sometimes used in on-ground culinary schools. And you can set them on your table, and you can make some cuts and then hold up your cuts against the model to see how it compares. There's also such thing as a 2-dimensional template that will show you the size and the names and the dimensions of these classical knife cuts. All right. You could also find such a reference online and print it out so that you've got something at your cutting board as a reference. And then I also see students that have a measuring tape or a ruler, and they will use these sort of measuring tools to help guide them along. All right. Now, I will also say that I don't, once you check your cuts a few times against a measuring tool or a template, I would say don't spend too much energy doing that. Instead, work on the muscle memory, right, of cutting, and the fluidity that comes with skill development and the experience. Okay, I think you'll find much more reward from that sort of an approach. If you want to really hone in on the perfect cuts for whatever reason, then you can come back around to providing more focus on the preciseness of your cuts. All right, thank you. Let's see, Maria's asking, can you please share the miso soup recipe? Maria, I don't have a recipe. I make miso soup every morning, but I'm making a quick pot of dashi with some katsuobushi, and I got some miso paste, some light shiro miso, some white miso, and some red miso. And I usually use a blend of the two. And then I put in the pot whatever is in the fridge. And often it's broccoli stems and it's cauliflower leaves that I'm utilizing because the flavor is beautiful, and other things too. So it's a little bit different every day. Okay, so in the spirit, okay, of Ruby courses, whether it's FOK or Pro Plant, Pro Cook, or one of the others, think about the sort of overarching framework, right? The cooking methods and the general approach rather than a specific recipe. Okay, thank you. All right. And Raj is asking, is there a Ruby smartphone app where shopping lists, tips, reminders, etc. come to life? Patrick, can you help me out here? Do we have such a thing? Quick answer, Raj, is no, we don't. All right. But something perhaps we'll keep in mind for the future. Appreciate your suggestion. And next up from Anita. Do you know if dietitians can get credits from Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics? Offhand, I don't, but that would require a visit to the Academy's website to see what their requirements might be. But just offhand, I'm not sure that we have an affiliation with them. All right, thank you. And next up, I made roasted Brussels sprouts today. I placed it on a parchment paper, oven at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 to 25 minutes. I added a dressing of lemon juice, salt, pepper, and a teaspoon of maple syrup, and I sprinkled sumac toward the end. Sprouts were cut in half. So that sounds awesome, Maria. So you've got high temperature, good baking time, and you have the development of the tastes, right? The acidity from the lemon juice, the saltiness, as well as the sweetness from the maple syrup, all right? And then, of course, we have all the other flavor complexity associated with the aroma as well that comes from that. That sounds very nice. Thank you for sharing. And Cara Lee, again, is asking, tofu is not sold in stores near me. In a small rural town. Since I've never tried it, what do I need to look for when ordering online? Generally, be aware of the textures ranging from very soft through extra firm. So there's medium firm, extra firm, as well as soft. And what the recipe suggests that you use. The soft variation will be a little more difficult to handle because it crumbles. It breaks apart very easily. It has a higher water content, whereas the firmer varieties will stand up to cooking much more readily. And so if you want to do, for example, some marinating and baking, then choose the medium or firm varieties. If you want a nice delicate texture in your miso soup, since this is a theme today, you might consider a soft variety and see how you like that texture. Also, if you want to puree the tofu to make into a sauce or a pie filling, or for your smoothie, then consider the soft variety. Right, thank you. And look at this. All of a sudden, we are looking at the last question from Catherine. What's the best way to clean a cast iron skillet after cooking something like cabbage and apples with oil? I feel like I don't get all the sugars off, and I want to take great care of my pans. Also, are wine or vinegar okay in cast iron? So a couple of questions here. Cleaning cast iron. My general approach to cast iron is to use a relatively soft scrubby pad, relatively soft one, and just get all of the sort of visible little things that are stuck on the pan off. And then if there's anything beyond that, like oil residue, I don't worry about it. That becomes part of the seasoning that builds up over time. And so it's usually desirable if you just leave some of that on there. Okay. And then our wine and vinegar is okay on the iron. Some of this stuff will, the quick answer is yes, it's okay. But any of these things, these liquids, will start to lift off the seasoning, and so work through your cooking process, and just keep an eye on the pans. And if they need to be tuned up a bit, maybe an additional layer of seasoning added through some oiling and some oven work, then consider that. Okay. But the seasoning layer is always in flux, right? It gets worn down, it gets built back up. And that's just the nature, right, of the cooking experience with those pans. All right, thank you. All right, and here we are at the end of my office hours. I want to thank all of you for joining me today, whether you joined from the very beginning or you dropped in midway through. And I hope that you found some benefit in today's discussion, and I'll look for you again next time. And in the meantime, enjoy your cooking. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.